My best quote is I can say that I would never wish that on my worst enemy.
It's been a real bad adventure, but I'm through it, and I can't be grateful enough.
For 6 decades, Britain's golden-voiced Peter Pan of pop seemed untouchable, until the day helicopters buzzed his Berkshire mansion and the BBC beamed a live police raid into millions of living rooms, branding him a villain before a single charge was filed. But the world had already tried to break Cliff Richard once before. In the 1970s, he secretly loved Olivia Newton-John, watched her marry his closest friend, and spent half a century nursing the wound while tabloids mocked his bachelor life.
Would you show me where you go?
Yeah, we go together, we can recuperate together.
Heartsick and publicly humiliated, Cliff lost weight, broke out in shingles, and locked himself indoors, convinced his own home was dirty. Yet today, at 85, the man who inspired the Beatles is back on arena stages, selling every ticket and breaking chart records in his 8th straight decade.
I've never felt so liberated, because usually when you're in the public eye, you sort of can't sort of go.
How did the shy boy from war-torn Lucknow survive unrequited love, false accusations, and an industry eager to bury him, and still emerge singing? Stay with me, because the twists behind Britain's greatest comeback will rewrite what you thought you knew about fame, faith, and the price of never giving up. Before he was Sir Cliff Richard, he was Harry Roger Webb, a 5-pound infant struggling for breath inside King George's Hospital in Lucknow on an October night in 1940. While bombs hammered Europe and India's streets shook with chants of "Quit India." By the time Harry could walk, the colony was shaking violently. Riots roared on Direct Action Day. British families locked their doors. In 1948, the Webbs fled on the rust-streaked SS Ranchi, crammed shoulder to shoulder with colonial exiles clinging to battered trunks and fading maps. 3 weeks of oily waves, limited water, and fear carried them from monsoon heat to the gray chill of post-war England. When the gangplank hit at Tilbury, every empire privilege was gone. The family squeezed into a tiny house in Carshalton, Surrey, where winter seeped through thin walls, and the only warmth came from a coal fire his father could barely afford. Classmates mocked his colonial accent. Teachers told him to be realistic, yet the voyage had planted a stubborn spark. Life could flip overnight, so you might as well dream big. At 16, Harry began sneaking into Soho coffee bars to watch skiffle bands play washboards and battered guitars. One smoky night, talent scout Harry Greatorex slid a scrap of paper across a table. "You need a name like granite, Cliff," and pay tribute to that wild American, Little Richard. Harry Roger Webb died that evening, replaced by a persona that sounded like a rock slide. He dyed his hair, boot polish, black, practiced Elvis moves in a fogged bathroom mirror, and convinced himself the scrawny immigrant kid could command excited teenagers who had never seen a homegrown rock star. The gamble became clear on 29 August 1958, when Move It burst from tinny transistor radios. Raw, snarling, defiantly British. Cliff was 18, and the record didn't just chart. It cracked the polite surface of post-war pop, giving a restless generation its own rebel icon. Yet nationwide hysteria was only the opening act, because with sudden fame would come fan stampedes, jealous rivals, and a heartbreak lurking backstage that no chart position could fix. The first snarling chord of Move It sounded less like a pop single and more like a controlled explosion under Britain's carefully starched post-war culture. Cliff had recorded the track in a basement studio the size of a broom closet, hunched over a cheap guitar he could barely afford, sweating beneath makeshift barriers of egg cartons and blankets. The moment producers played it at Radio Luxembourg, teenage Britain, long fed on sweet crooners, felt electricity for the first time. Girls clutched radios and shrieked. Boys who thought British music could never beat America suddenly feared they might be wrong. By the time it hit number 2, concert halls were turning into pressure cookers. Fans fainted, ushers panicked, ambulance crews lined the aisles. Newspapers called it Cliff hysteria, and Cliff, still only 18, learned there is no volume control on overnight fame. With every new show, the stakes climbed. In Manchester, police formed human chains as thousands slammed against the stage door chanting his name. At the Liverpool Empire, a balcony railing bent under the weight of swooning fans. His mother started sewing spare shirts into his tour jacket because girls kept ripping buttons for souvenirs. The NME ran breathless headlines. Britain has its own Elvis. Yet backstage, after each show, Cliff sat in silence, wondering if the roar outside loved Harry Webb or the fake person he'd built overnight. In dingy clubs from Liverpool to London, sharp-suited bands studied his every move, determined to knock him off his throne. One group, fresh back from Hamburg, watched his chart success with hungry eyes and decided to push harder, faster, louder. Their name? The Beatles. But before that wave crashed, Cliff Richard would seize one final summer of glory. 1963 should have been the year Cliff Richard coasted. Summer Holiday exploded onto cinema screens in January, splashing Technicolor optimism across a nation still gray from war. By Easter, the soundtrack had locked itself at #1, and 3,000 screaming fans blocked Leicester Square so tightly that Cliff never even made it to his own premiere. Inside record company offices, executives celebrated. Britain's first rock king clearly had another decade ahead. But in Liverpool's Cavern Club, 4 leather-clad upstarts were sharpening a new sound, raw, witty, and dangerously addictive. When Beatlemania reached fever pitch later that year, critics wrote Cliff's death notice almost overnight. They were certain the polite boy with a quiff couldn't stand against Lennon's wit or McCartney's grin. Yet the charts told a different story. While A Hard Day's Night competed with Summer Holiday at box offices, Cliff quietly released 6 top 10 singles in 1964, beating the Beatles 5 on home turf. The battle spilled onto stages. In Sheffield, promoters booked the Beatles at the City Hall and Cliff at the Gaumont on back-to-back nights, daring fans to pick sides. Both shows sold out in minutes, yet newspapers noted Cliff's audience was wider. From grandmothers humming ballads to leather jacket rebels singing every word. Even Paul McCartney admitted years later, "We ran to Hamburg because Cliff had Britain locked up." John Lennon put it simpler. Before Richard and Move It, nothing worth hearing existed in England. Recognition peaked in 1965 when New Musical Express polled readers worldwide for Best Male Vocalist. Cliff beat Elvis, Lennon, and McCartney easily, puzzling experts who insisted mop tops had buried every pre-60s idol. How did he pull it off? Flexibility. One week he sang orchestra ballads for housewives. The next, he played rockabilly for bikers. He wore sparkly waistcoats on top of the pops, yet spent Sundays quietly serving soup at church drives. Where the Beatles broke barriers down, Cliff learned to slip around them without ever letting the mask fall. Still, the applause carried a hidden pain. Hotel corridors echoed with rumors that fame felt empty, that backstage Cliff paced alone while his bandmates partied. Reporters loved to poke. Why no girlfriend on his arm? Was the squeaky, clean image real? Cliff smiled, dodged questions, and sang another encore. Yet the private battle lines were drawn. The huge wave of global stardom on one side, a deeply personal search for meaning on the other. The crash came in June 1966 under the harsh spotlights of Earl's Court, when Cliff stepped beside evangelist Billy Graham and shocked the pop world with a confession that threatened to end everything he had built. The spotlight washed over Earl's Court on a humid June evening in 1966, but Cliff Richard didn't step up to sing. Instead, the man Britain linked with teenage rebellion took the microphone beside American evangelist Billy Graham and announced, in a voice steadier than his heartbeat, that he had given his life to Christ. Cameras flashed. Thousands of fans froze mid-scream. Becoming a pop idol had been daring. Announcing faith on live television while the swinging 60s rewrote every rule of excess felt almost like career suicide. Within hours, the music press predicted a career death. Agents canceled tour dates. Radio producers whispered that listeners wanted jukebox sins, not salvation. Even Cliff's own management urged him to keep the news quiet, or at least subtle. Cliff refused. For 18 months, he thought about quitting altogether. Teaching school maybe, or missionary work. He believed stardom and spirituality could never share the same stage lights. Yet, loneliness followed him during that pause. Applause echoed in his ears like a ghost feeling. He realized the stage was not the problem. His secrecy was. So he made an unheard of deal. He wouldn't preach during concerts, but neither would he hide the cross he now wore under his collar. Behind studio doors, he insisted on clean lyrics and slipped gospel touches into pop melodies. Industry veterans smirked that he'd grow boring. Instead, his voice grew stronger and more relaxed. Friends noticed the shy boy who once copied Elvis now held eye contact, unafraid of silence. "My confidence grew," he later said. "I didn't need the swagger anymore. Fans sensed it too." His 1968 single Congratulations stormed to #1 in 11 countries and nearly won Eurovision. In 1969, Goodbye Sam, Hello Samantha echoed from every radio on British beaches. The Beatles were inventing psychedelia, the Stones playing with dark themes. But Cliff, armed with nothing beyond steady faith and clear melody, still packed Wembley. He became proof that pop could grow without losing its soul, carving a path no British act had mapped before. Yet even newfound purpose couldn't protect him forever. By the mid-70s, radio waves cooled, chart spots vanished, and critics filed him under nostalgia. The man who'd once outsold the Beatles suddenly had 0 hits in a calendar year. From that silence rose a snarling guitar riff and a song called Devil Woman that would drag him back into the fight. By 1975, the roar that once shook theater balconies had shrunk to a polite cough. Cliff's latest single stalled. His tour slipped to half-filled civic halls, and for the first time since skiffle ruled the airwaves, he finished a calendar year without a single chart entry. Music papers printed death notices in advance. The king has sung his last. Radio programmers quietly moved his old records into golden oldies bins. Even Cliff wondered if the curtain had dropped for good. Then came a riff like an electrical storm. In a cramped EMI studio, songwriter Terry Britton pushed a demo across the console. A tale of a stray cat, a fortune teller, and a curse that backfires. The working title, Devil Woman. Cliff's managers worried. Too dark, too witchy, they said. Cliff listened twice, grinned, and booked studio time. He stripped away the syrupy strings label executives suggested and leaned hard into snarling guitars, snappy hand claps, and a bass line that stalked like bad luck down a moonlit alley. When the single dropped in April 1976, nobody, least of all Cliff, expected what followed. Within weeks, Devil Woman slashed into the UK top 10, then leaped across the Atlantic to #6 on the Billboard Hot 100, his first American top 10. Rock magazines that once dismissed him as bubblegum suddenly called him the most unlikely comeback of the decade. 2 million copies flew off shelves. Even harder-edged icons took notice. Jimmy Page was spotted backstage wearing an I'm Nearly Famous badge, a nod to Cliff's new album, while Eric Clapton and Elton John praised him in interviews. Overnight, the man labeled yesterday's teen idol was teaching lessons in comeback to guitar gods half his age. Critics waited for the slip that never came. In 1979, Cliff fired off We Don't Talk Anymore, a glossy earworm that hit #1 in 11 countries and sold nearly 5 million copies worldwide. Suddenly, discos, youth clubs, and late-night taxi radios were pulsing with a voice thought dead. By the close of the decade, Cliff wasn't merely back. He was setting new records, top 5 albums, sold-out arenas, and television specials booked months ahead. But the real shock lay ahead. In 1989, he would stand before 72,000 fans at Wembley, release his 100th single, and score #1 hits in a 5th straight decade. No British artist had ever done this. By the end of the 80s, Cliff Richard had turned survival into victory. On a mild June night in 1989, he walked onto Wembley's vast stage for a show bluntly titled The Event. Cameras showed 72,000 fans, grandparents in tartan rugs, teenagers in neon scrunchies, chanting his name loud enough to shake the steel. The first half was a time machine. Cliff brought back the 1950s television show Oh Boy, sharing the stage with the Vernon's Girls and the Kalin Twins, proving nostalgia could feel electric, not dusty. Then the lights snapped to modern white, synth pads swelled, and he jumped into fresh hits, showing the very range critics once mocked. 2 weeks later, EMI shipped a live album. It cracked the top 5 before most fans even opened it, but Wembley was only the warm-up. That May, Cliff released his 100th single, inviting 2,000 fans to London's Palladium to vote on which track should mark the milestone. They chose The Best of Me, and charts obeyed. Number 2 in the UK, silver status in a month. Radio play from Dublin to New Zealand. Christmas 1990 proved the point. Saviour's Day knocked Ice Ice Baby off the festive number 1. Filmed on a wind-blown Dorset cliff in September, its fake winter video featured fans sweating in scarves while Cliff delivered a chorus that stuck like candy cane syrup. It proved the 50s idol could still beat MTV superstars 3 decades younger, yet industry tastemakers were itching to shift the spotlight. By 1999, mainstream radio stations quietly banned heritage acts, code for anyone over 40. When Cliff unveiled Millennium Prayer, BBC Radio 1 and 2 both ignored it. Virgin's breakfast host sneered that Cliff was too old for airplay. Journalists smirked, calling the single a church hymn stitched to the Lord's Prayer. Cliff fought back with nothing but belief and his fans' wallets. Within days, supermarkets reported sellouts. Churches bulk bought copies after Sunday service. The single rocketed to number 1 and stayed there 3 straight weeks, outselling every playlisted rival and raising hundreds of thousands for children's charities. It made Cliff the only artist to score chart toppers in 5 straight decades, 50s through 90s, while exposing the industry's age bias on live television. But the broadcaster Cliff had just embarrassed wasn't finished with him. Less than 15 years later, the BBC would return. Not with silence, but with whirring helicopter blades and the most humiliating live broadcast in British music history. It happened at 10 a.m. on August 14, 2014. A blue Berkshire sky, the sort of morning Cliff Richard usually spent trimming rose bushes or practicing vintage hits on his patio. Instead, a roar thundered overhead. Television footage later showed it in real time. A BBC hired helicopter banking low, blades sending dust across the lawns of the singer's private estate. Cameras zoomed on officers pushing through French doors. Cliff, relaxing 1,500 miles away at his Portugal apartment, watched live as strangers searched through bedside drawers, lifted framed gold records, and rolled carpets looking for evidence he thought burglars had struck, until the news ticker spelled out his name beside words like historic abuse investigation. In seconds, Britain's knighted pop grandfather became a global headline, guilty by broadcast. Boff had been arranged in secret meetings between South Yorkshire police and BBC executives, who allegedly called the raid the money shot. Viewers from Sydney to Sao Paulo watched every slow-motion zoom. Cliff collapsed to his kitchen tiles, sobbing. By the time he boarded a flight home, tabloids had printed huge spreads, breaking down a single claim by a man who said Cliff had attacked him at a 1985 Billy Graham rally, yet described a locker room that never existed. Still, the investigation dragged on for 22 months. No arrest, no charge. Yet the damage was everywhere. Shingles erupted down Cliff's spine. He lost nearly a stone. Sleeplessness left him slurring interviews. Friends said he began calling his mansion dirty, sleeping in guest rooms because the master suite felt haunted by cameras. A would-be blackmailer emailed threats, offering to make everything disappear for cash. DJs mocked his holier-than-thou hymns. Meanwhile, the BBC submitted its raid footage for journalism awards, bragging about exclusive access while Cliff sat through blood pressure checks and legal meetings. In 2018, a high court judge finally declared the broadcast a serious, shocking breach of privacy and ordered damages of nearly £2 million. South Yorkshire police issued a humble apology. The BBC paid extra after a harsh line-by-line verdict. Yet Cliff told MPs the stain would outlive any payout. "I'll never again look a stranger in the eye without wondering what they're thinking." But through the mess of lawsuits and sleepless nights, a quieter grief flickered. One rooted not in scandal, but in a lost chance at love that had shadowed him since the early 70s. Because while the world debated his innocence, Cliff's heart was still tied to a woman whose final phone call left him unprepared for the silence that followed. Cliff Richard first saw Olivia Newton-John beneath the brutal glare of BBC studio lamps in 1971, when a producer paired the 22-year-old Australian newcomer with Britain's veteran pop prince for a duet on It's Cliff Richard. Their voices blended so smoothly, the cameraman forgot to cut away, lingering on a shot that felt almost intimate for early 70s television. Cliff felt the spark instantly. A warm jolt, he later wrote. He had kept the feeling behind the practiced smile he'd spent a decade perfecting. Within weeks, Olivia was a regular on his tour coach, trading harmonies and rehearsal spaces while roadies carried amps through Midland's rain. Every member of the Shadows noticed the attraction. None mentioned it because Olivia was already engaged to rhythm guitarist Bruce Welch, Cliff's bandmate and close friend. The triangle crackled with unspoken words. When reporters asked if the silver ring on Olivia's finger meant wedding bells, she answered with shy shrugs. Bruce pretended confidence, though crew members heard shouting matches behind hotel doors. Cliff, ever the gentleman, channeled confusion into music. He and Olivia recorded Suddenly for the Xanadu soundtrack in 1980, their microphones 12 inches apart, headphones hiding heartbeats. Play it back today, and you can still hear a tiny tremor in his final high note, the sound of a man harmonizing with a life he never lived. Olivia ended her 5-year engagement to Bruce in '73, leaving him broken enough to hurt himself. Rumors swirled that she and Cliff had confessed their feelings during a late-night Paris cab ride, but neither spoke a word. Cliff's strict faith clashed with his longing. Olivia's career rocketed to Grease superstardom. Timing dissolved like stage fog. They remained best friends for half a century, trading Christmas calls, guest starring on each other's television specials, slipping private jokes into public duets. Cliff nicknamed her Livy Love. She called him Livy's Cliffy, an inside joke about never quite meeting on the same shore. Then, on 8th August 2022, Olivia's 3-decade fight with cancer ended. 3 weeks earlier, Cliff had phoned her from Portugal. "Good day, Cliff. How are you, darling?" she chirped, voice bright as Malibu dawn. He hung up believing they had seasons left. News of her passing struck between rehearsals for his 2023 orchestra album. Cliff stared at the studio glass until engineers muted the talk back, afraid the silence might break. In his memoir, he confessed the honest truth. "I loved her, many of us did, but I never told her in time." At London's Royal Albert Hall that October, he played their 2015 live recording of Suddenly, standing still as her absent line echoed through the hall. Fans wept. Cliff mouthed goodbye. Journalists, hunting headlines in the void, revisited his bachelor status. He'd once joked that pop stardom and celibacy made strange partners, yet Olivia's shadow explained what gossip never could. He'd measured every other woman against a standard set half a century earlier and found none who fit. In quieter moments, he confessed to friends that losing Olivia and the false accusation ordeal felt like twin storms tearing the same roof. Yet grief forged renewed purpose. He poured it into charity concerts, raised millions for cancer wards in her honor, and promised his story would not end with loss. Because beyond heartbreak and cleared headlines lay one final act, a defiant, celebration-sized run that would make him the only artist to conquer 8 straight decades of British charts, proving that even broken hearts can beat the odds when the curtain rises again. 85 isn't supposed to smell like fresh tour bus vinyl, but in early 2025, Cliff Richard released a teaser video that flipped every rule of retirement on its head. Shot in crisp 8K, it opens on an empty arena, floor lights pulsing, seats ghostly in darkness. A single silhouette steps into the beam. Silver hair, black leather jacket, and the audience roars from speakers, although no crowd is there yet. White text slams across the screen. "Can't stop me now. 8 decades, 1 voice." Within 24 hours, pre-sale links disappeared. Sheffield, Glasgow, Sydney, and Auckland cleared their ticket inventories in minutes, promoters scrambling to add afternoon shows for fans too slow on the click. The stat sheet behind the hype reads like a record book fever dream. 147 million records sold, 65 UK top 10s, chart entries in every decade since Eisenhower was president. Yet Cliff's press conference at London's Royal Garden Hotel felt surprisingly intimate. He leaned toward the mic, eyes still catching light like polished stage chrome, and joked, "If I'm the Peter Pan of pop, this tour is Neverland with better sound." Reporters threw age-baiting questions. How will he handle 2-hour sets? What about the high notes? But Cliff hit them back with practiced warmth. Vocal coach at dawn. Exercise at Noon, set lists designed to flow from 1958's Move It to 2024's orchestra version of We Don't Talk Anymore, with a gospel medley to honor the altar that steadied him through scandal. Behind the scenes, tech crews mixed nostalgia and cutting-edge spectacle. LED cylinders recreate the neon swirl of Soho's Two Eyes Coffee Bar, where Cliff sang for tips. An augmented reality section projects a teenage Cliff opposite his 85-year-old self for a call-and-response verse of Living Doll. During rehearsal, the effect made even road veterans emotional. A time loop duet proving the kid who left Lucknow was still alive inside the knighted survivor. Critics, ever doubtful, clung to the BBC raid as a legacy footnote, until ticket data forced a rewrite. 4 nights at the O2 sold faster than Billie Eilish's most recent run. When pre-sale codes leaked to fan forums, grandparents partnered with grandchildren on joint logins, forging a cross-generational alliance the streaming era rarely creates. Spotify built a Cliff-focused editorial playlist, and Gen Z TikTokers mixed Devil Woman riffs under cosplay makeup tutorials, pushing the track's streams past 50 million for the first time. But the tour's heart isn't data. It's the unbroken line from the SS Ranchi to center stage. Proof that a boy who once shared deck space with Empire refugees can outlast industries, investigations, and even unspoken love. In Cliff's closing rehearsal, he holds the final note of "The best of me." Then let silence breathe. A grin cutting through follow spot haze. After all this, he quips, "I suppose the only real curse is being nearly famous." Curtain drops, lights die, and crew chief radios a single word: ready. Because if Cliff Richard's life teaches anything, it's that strength isn't an ending. It's the hook that keeps the chorus looping long after doubters fade to black. For Cliff Richard, strength isn't a footnote. It's the through line that ties a refugee boy on the SS Ranchi to an 85-year-old headlining sold-out arenas. He's lived 3 gut-punch headlines: losing the woman he loved, watching a false raid splashed across the world, and weathering decades of critics eager to declare him finished. Yet each time he came back stronger, reinventing himself without giving up the faith that steadied him. He proved you can be Britain's first rock rebel, a chart-topping gospel singer, an industry outcast, and a legal trailblazer, all in one lifetime. More incredible still, he did it without the usual badges of success. No spouse, no children, no scandalous tell-all to cash in. Just songs, grit, and a refusal to quit. So the next time someone tells you reinvention has an end date, remember the man who scored #1 hits across 5, and soon 8, decades. Who turned a televised humiliation into a landmark privacy victory, and who still ends concerts with a grin that says, "I'm not nearly famous, I'm still just getting started."